Thank you all for being here. I'm going to work for my notes because we're broadcasting this over the computer on Zoom, and we have a number of people watching us and will participate. And we have all of you in the audience, so thank you for coming. Welcome to this panel on housing. I think it's a very important panel. It's not good. Is what? Yes, it is. Now, the title is SB10. When improper planning catches up with us. I want to thank Andrew Mallett for suggesting that title. My name is Mike Stepner, and I have the privilege of being the moderator. Group of experts
Do I do this?
on the housing problem. We are going to discuss housing this afternoon. A continuing discussion that has gone on and will go on forever and ever. We're going to discuss where we are today. Then we'll discuss potential approaches how we meet our housing needs, and as importantly, or perhaps even more importantly, how we build communities. The title is very broad. However, we will not be debating the pros and cons of SB10. That has done a lot of good for us because it's brought a lot of people together to discuss the housing issues. But it's also one that can take us off into the weeds and it's become very divisive. It has perhaps had a silver lining because it has initiated a number of discussions that we're going to have today. From the flyer, San Diego is facing a housing crisis, with the most critical need being affordable and missing middle housing. To address this crisis, the state of California has a legislation to make it easier to locate and build higher density housing. Now is our opportunity to gather as a community and discuss the issue again. So you're all here to be part of that. I want to introduce our panel. I'll give you a short brief resume of who they are. We would be here forever if I read all their achievements and all that they are bringing to the discussions. First, I'd like to introduce Mary Lydon. She's the Executive Director of HomeAid, a national organization that builds nonprofit housing for service providers who serve at-risk populations. Mary has 30 years of experience in land use planning, housing policy, and economic and community development. She's a former City of San Diego Planning Commissioner and has held key leadership roles with the Housing Humanity Coalition, the Urban Land Institute, and Downtown San Diego Partnership, and many other nonprofit boards over the course of her career. And she and I are in the box, so authored a number of articles. Gary London is a principal and founder of the London Motor Group Real Estate Consultants. He is widely regarded as one of the nation's foremost real estate advisors to many of the nation's largest developers, investors, lenders, and real estate asset managers and owners. Mr. London has been at the forefront of understanding and describing the many demographic, technological, and societal changes that are transforming our cities and regions. Carlo Flores was named Executive Director of the Local Initiative Support Corporation LISC in April of 2017. He joined the nonprofit funding agency after serving 12 years in leading roles with top San Diego elected officials. In his role, Mr. Flores oversees LISC's extensive network of investment-based collaborations that support San Diego's underserved neighborhoods. And he has also researched and written a lot on the issue of redlining, where our land use regulations have shaped our housing and what has affected various neighborhoods in our community and everywhere. Susan Baldwin is a retired planner whose professional career included working for the cities of Boulder, La Mesa, and San Diego in the San Diego Association of Governments. While at Sandex, she worked on housing and land use issues for 27 years. Most notably, she prepared 3 regional housing needs assessments, RENAs, and worked with all 19 jurisdictions on smart growth and transit-oriented development policies. Since her retirement, she has been an active advocate for affordable housing and sensible land use and infrastructure policy to help create more livable communities and address the climate crisis. We'll point out that she's doing all that since her retirement. Some of us who enter retirement never quite retire. We're just Andrew Mallett is the CEO of Mallett Infill Development Company. 20 years experience in real estate development industry, held a master's degrees in architecture and urban design, and is a graduate of the Woodbury Master of Architecture and Real Estate Development Program, where architects are taught skills When not working on his projects, Andrew works nationally to help local state governments adapt healthy policy to align with the sustainable development principles. Andrew has guest lectured at multiple local universities, including USD, New School, and San Diego State University. He has also taught a course on sustainable development practices at the University of California, San Diego. As I said, he provided the title for this program. Jack Uter is the chair of Neighbors for a Better San Diego, a volunteer grassroots organization that promotes sensible, data-driven planning for San Diego. And prior to that, Dr. Uter was Chief Technology Officer and co-founder of Sertona Corporation, a leader in real-time AI-powered omnichannel personalization for the world's largest online retailers. Dr. Uter received his PhD in physics from the University of California, where he studied gamma ray bursts. Receiving his PhD, Dr. Uter joined HNC Software, the early commercialization of AI and natural networks. We'll see how all that plays into our discussion this afternoon as well. And lastly, Bill Anderson. Bill is the owner and principal of CityCon. He teaches economics at UCSD's Urban Studies and Planning Department, a consultant on the intersection of urban planning and economics for 4 decades. Bill has had senior positions with Economics Research Association, AECOM, and ARA, nationally, internationally, and in San Diego. He was director of city planning and community investment for the city of San Diego from 2006 to 2011. He is vice chair of ULI's Urban Revitalization Council and active with ULI's First Infrastructure Forum on 15-minute communities. He's past president of the American Planning Association and California Planning Roundtable. The mayor of San Diego has been on several community organization boards, including C3, EDC, City Heights CDC, and currently the San Diego Parks Foundation. He is a member and chair of the San Diego Planning Commission from 1995 to 2003. And he received his BA from Claremont Community College, Claremont College, McKenna College, and MSCP from Harvard. English panel, and I read a lot. The format for this afternoon will be a conversation among the panel and the audience, for those of you who are here and those of you who are on. Questions and answers and closing remarks and other things. And at the end, I will ask each panel where we think we're going, where we are, and where we think we are going, or should address our housing and community needs. Let me make some opening remarks just to set the stage. Is that what we're talking about is just not about the number of houses. The quote that's in the flyer from Michael Willis, give a vision of look at where you're going with all of this. I also feel very strongly that there is no neighborhood in San Diego that is built out. And there is lots of room for additional development that is done well. And there is a need for housing. The questions are how much, where, what type, and how we provide the services that are needed. Question whether tinkering with land use regulations is only a very small part of this. Really, it's about neighborhood and community, it's not about the number of people. And I will add my caution.
Today, you hear about the perspectives, ideas, successes, and challenges. All have merit. We are trying to move at warp speed, but we are untangling 50 years of semi-unconscious decision-making. That's going to take some time. But one thing is crystal clear. We're all aligned that we need more affordable housing. That is huge, to have an alignment. That we can make progress when there's alignment. In some ways, we're doing it, but just not fast enough. Here's some numbers that demonstrate action. From March 2022 to February 2023, 11,000 homeless people moved into a home. But during that same time, for every 10 people that were placed into a home, 13 became homeless. We're seeing now that getting homeless people into homes is great, but a bigger piece at this moment is to shift the focus to help people stay in their homes so they don't end up on the street in the first place. There were over 9,000 homes built last year in San Diego County. Most were multifamily in the city of San Diego and built above moderate income levels. We can build housing, but we need to figure out how to catalyze housing at a lower price point. Since 2017, California has passed 100 pieces of legislation intended to help overcome the lack of affordable housing. Are these policies working? Only time will tell. The community dialogue around Senate Bill 10, which was the impetus for bringing us here together today, basically ends single-family zoning. This is one approach to increase more housing in all neighborhoods. But I think Assembly Bill 2011 has the ability to move quicker by providing by right development along outdated strip mall corridors. Also, since these corridors have existing infrastructure, the cost to build is reduced. The policy allows developers to build when affordability, labor, and environmental criteria are met. Development industry doesn't always like to be accepting of policy where there's a wage requirement, but I think that the benefits of by right development and CEQA streamline far outweigh an increase in wage requirements. After all, don't we want the people who build our homes to be able to live in some of the homes that they're building? We are meeting the call for more housing. Some initiatives are working, some are not. We have a long way to go. Something that is different now versus 50 years ago is that decisions are being made with diversity, equity, and inclusion front and center. This is huge. We're going through a revolution of consciousness in this country and really in this world. It's going to take a little time to bring the majority along so that we can establish a new framework of fairness. It's clear to me that in order to move forward, we need cooperation, collaboration, a collective vision, action plan, and accountability. One idea to get us working with this common goal of more affordable housing is to create a Center for Housing Innovation. It could take place during the San Diego World Design Capital celebration next year. The goals and outcomes of the center would be to engage, connect, educate stakeholders, building industry professionals, elected officials, and design leaders like you. We would do this by meeting throughout the year to showcase innovative leadership, products, systems, policies that would have the potential to lower the cost of building homes. If you're interested in this idea, let's talk. I'm looking forward to hearing the perspectives from my fellow panelists and continuing the dialogue with all of you.
Thank you, Mary. Gary?
Thank you. So I'm kind of the economic dirt kicker. My clients are real estate developers, investors, anybody that has real property. Come to my company and ask questions regarding, is there a market for the product? What's the product?
That was good. When I was at the planning department, I had a bar of soap, and if a developer came in and used the word product, I would say, let's go to the bathroom and wash your mouth out.
And as I recall, I worked for you and I never got that part. Maybe I go back to them. But we work on lots of different projects, and over the many decades I've been involved in real estate development business in San Diego. We've been responsible for feasibility studies and projects. Let me just say this, and I'm going to try to just sort of go through some headlines and try to make it as provocative as I can. Other than the existential issues of climate change and nuclear annihilation, I can't think of anything more important than the hollowing and the middle class in our society. And that's an income problem. And it's no more pronounced, this issue of income, than in coastal California, including San Diego. And the housing problem is at its roots an income problem, because that's where we spend most of our income. So while we're sitting here talking about housing, we really need to be talking about, how people make a living and the amounts of money that we spend on housing, because while we are not the most expensive housing market on the West Coast, the gap between our median income and our housing costs is the widest it has historically been. So that's a big issue in San Diego. If you look at the projections that San Diego Association of Governments has come out with, they create every couple of years a series of projections. They're projecting a future unlike the past in our region. We've had decades back in the last century where we were growing at 30,000 people a year. We're looking forward now to basically taking a whole digit off of that number in any given year in terms of future growth. Why is that? It's because the amount of births is being succeeded by a greater amount of deaths. So natural increase is going down. There's birth rates aren't at the same levels, the same numbers of people as they were previously. And middle class families are leaving it. We have a high level of relatively moderate income families, mostly families that are leaving the economy, and they're not being replaced by immigrants, whether they're national immigrants or international immigrants at the level that we've had before. So a critical, Mary talks about affordable housing, but I'd like to focus attention on what I think is really the corpus of the problem, which is family housing, and housing for people that essentially sustain our economy. The problem that we have in our society today, in our local society, with respect to public policy, and let me just don't sort of say as a sideline that I think our policymakers are doing a pretty good job. In all of my career, I've never seen a set of council people, mayor, San Diego, people that represent the smaller communities do a better job at stepping up and trying to address the housing issues. They're doing as good a job as they can. The problem is they're elected on a short-term basis, and these problems, as Mike and I have discussed and articulated, are long-term problems. So we need to be thinking about solutions that are long-term solutions. The problem right now is that even though the growth numbers going forward are down, we are behind the 8 ball in terms of the amount of housing units that we have failed to provide historically. You can pick your point, it could be 100,000, 200,000 units. It's a lot of units. And it suggests to me that we're perpetually behind that 8 ball, that we're never really going to catch up. Part of the problem is that with all the encouragement of infill housing that the city has offered up for us in the state as well through the Surplus Lands Act and other things that passed and that are coming. The problem is that you can add all those housing units up and they just can't solve the problem. We were growing by those 30,000 people back in the last century. The way we solved our problem is growing out rather than up. We didn't concentrate it infill. We couldn't do it infill. So what happened was we built projects, most of which began with the name ranch. And I know because I did the feasibility studies, I think, on every ranch project in San Diego. So I haven't been in the rancho business for a long time. Mostly I've been in the urban infill business, the kind of stuff that Malik and a lot of his competitors and temporaries provide. The problem is that all the units that they put up, all the units that are encouraged by city policy, can't get to the numbers to replace the housing that we lost. So what that causes economically is a bid up in prices. We're always behind the other 8 ball, which is the supply and demand curve. We can't supply enough housing. to the demand, which is a problem that is particularly acute right now. The elephant in the room is this. While the state and the city and other cities like Chula Vista, even a lot of suburban cities which were involved in San Marcos, a number of communities, all of them have been sort of working hard to encourage more housing. The problem is they've done that at the exclusion of looking at housing in the county unincorporated areas. And I'm not talking about environmentally sensitive properties. I'm not talking about the backlands, the properties that we want to preserve. I'm talking about properties that mostly hug the major freeways in the unincorporated areas, that we've essentially created an urban limit line to exclude those kinds of development. So we can't get to a housing balance of supply and demand until we put those projects like that into the equation. And I'm also not talking about building suburbs the way we used to build them. I think that let me give you an example. If you look at Carmel Valley, which was a project that began by two developers in the early 1980s. And it has its issues in terms of how it was built. I've got my own issues with it. But it was built as essentially a residential community with a little bit of support on the commercial side. In the 1990s began something else, however. And it's culminated today in 5 million square feet of office space around Del Mar Heights Road. So in other words, what's happened is Del Mar has become the third largest office node in San Diego County. Now, why is that? It's very simple. We've taken surveys and we've understood for years that most of the employees, and certainly the heads of the businesses that occupy the buildings in that community, live in the 92130 zip code or the next adjacent zip code. In other words, they live nearby. And that's the catalyst for development of that office space there, which is to say Carmel Valley is acting as a suburban community like an urban community. So if you take that as an example going forward, we can replicate that and do a lot better job in building master plans and do it in a way where it's efficient, where we solve some of the major issues. For instance, traffic is a major issue that we always go back to. Whenever this community pushback, we go back to traffic. The way we solve that issue is by the ultimate traffic solution, which is live close to where you work or live where you work, which is a whole other discussion, which where past is now prologue, because all that is changing in our society too. So I just want to put that out there, and I'm going to go back to some of the other issues since I kicked off. Who's next, Mike?
No, finish.
Not done. I mean, I could go out, but I'll stop.
We'll have time. Ricardo.
17 pages here.
Keep an eye on him, Andrew.
Thank you for having us here. It's a great panel discussion. So for us, SB10 is just a vehicle. It's a vehicle to fulfill a really important goal. The goal that was started by the Civil Rights Movement of true integration in our communities. And I say that to take you back to the history a little bit. Very clear where we know single family zoning came from Berkeley, 1960. As a reaction to the knowledge that the following year, the Supreme Court was going to rule that covenants and deeds were unconstitutional. So in a sense, we have a law that is acting like the deeds and the covenants. The difference here between the deeds and the covenant is it spells out people's race. With single family zoning, it was much more benign. The goal was if you want to live in certain neighborhoods, you have to buy 5,000 square feet of land and the home on top. That kept the price point exclusively high. And in fact, the gentleman who actually pushed this issue, in the developer in Berkeley, was the head of the Sierra Club for several years. In fact, there's a mountain named down in California. But his own organization in 2021 actually said this in a periodical at the Sierra Club of the Bay Area. They said that the goal of single family zoning was to keep costs prohibitively high and to keep out certain individuals that they did not want. First and foremost, that has to change. We cannot be a country with laws or a Declaration of Independence or a Constitution and still value equity and opportunity, and yet have a law on the books that there is no doubt was used to segregate individuals. The interesting thing about this is that that conversation dovetails to the present in so many different ways. Gary mentioned it with climate. We are literally driving ourselves to death. Literally driving ourselves into extinction as a species, right? We are literally, as Gary mentioned, telling young people, do not live here, do not come here, go somewhere else. That is our future. We have 3 great or more universities here, but we're not providing an opportunity for those young people to stay here and to have families. And then the second part of this is our city. It was mentioned at the beginning, I was the chief of staff or a council member for 4 years. The city of San Diego collects $740 million in property taxes. That's incredibly low, folks. The value of our properties in this county are huge. What's missing here is the fact that 80% of our city of San Diego is zoned for one type of zoning only, single family. Think about that for a second. A single family plot is about the size of a basketball court. 80% of our city have families living on a basketball court. And we're wondering why we're having a housing crisis. We cannot, it's unsustainable to allow 80% of our communities to continue operating as if business as usual, because it's not usual. But the pathway forward, SB10, as we see it, would allow for the land to be subdivided. All of you in this room know you can take 1,000 square feet and put a 2,000 square foot unit on there with a garage at the bottom, 3 stories. It's easy, we can do it. And by allowing young families, even retirees, to buy 1,000 square feet of land to live in Point Loma versus 5,000 square feet of land to live in Point Loma, that difference is the middle income housing. In effect, the problem we have is staring at us right in the face. And I would surmise that when the public truly understands how simple this fix is, how it costs no money, they're going to be angry at policymakers and leaders because they were not being truthful to them. The counter argument here is we want to keep our neighborhoods looking the same way. Sure, I live in Kensington. My wife and I love the look of Kensington, but that look can be replicated by Andrew Malik and his people. They can build, if you really like colonial style housing, they can build it, right? If you like modern, they can build it. What we cannot replicate and what we can't deny is that the neighborhood that I live in, I live there, but it's not a neighborhood of Latinos or Black people. There is no doubt that it's not. That is a real problem, and it's a continued indictment of our society. And I would surmise also that this generation, the baby boomers, the people that raised me, my parents, as they retire, and as this next generation, because it's not even me, I'm sandwiched between 2 giant generations, millennials and baby boomers. This millennial generation, 20 years, when they're in their 40s, they're going to make this change. Make no mistake, they are going to do something because they're fed up, they're tired, and they're not buying into the idea that you just can't live here because you need to work hard like I did. That's not real. In fact, I was talking to my father the other day, because Gary, you mentioned this. My parents started off in City Heights. Then they decided to buy a new home in Rancho San Diego. And some of their friends decided to go to a new tract subdivision called Scripps Ranch. My dad bought the house for about $100,000 in Rancho San Diego for about $500,000 now. That home is now worth $900,000. Folks, something is fundamentally not right. And again, it's very, very simple. Allow people to buy less land to put a 2,000 square foot home, because we're not talking about saying you're going to have to live in a 1-bedroom or a big studio. People want what all of us have, which is a 2-bedroom and a living room and all of that stuff. But the most important thing that government can do is it can stop picking winners and losers, and it can say, you can buy 1,000 square feet. You can build on that. and they can allow that as a ministerial process in urban infill area without CEQA regulation. And you all will be key in this discussion because ultimately we have to figure out a way to design that building, to build it quickly and to build it under a certain price point so that we can put families in Point Loma in $1 million neighborhood for about $550. Because you can cut the land cost down a fourth of that to $250, and then it's a game for Andrew and his people to build a product at $300,000 or maybe a little higher. The last thing I'll mention is that we've actually, unfortunately, hit a tipping point. We are now at homes worth $1 million. For people that are in the real estate business, you know what that means, especially mortgage brokers. Once you pass $1 million, you now have to put 5% down, and you have to put at least $20,000 to $25,000 in closing costs. Under $1 million, you could put about 3% down, and you could pay about $15,000 in closing costs, assuming a family with no debt. This is a magical borrow. But again, the numbers start to creep once you go over $1 million, and we have now hit $1 million. Housing should be treated like inflation. We've got to ensure that it's at a price point that people can survive. Because at the end of the day, where do we all live? We're human beings. We don't have tough skin like reptiles. We can't sit in the baking sun. We need shelter. We need a place to go. We need 8 hours of sleep. We need fresh water and dirty water out. We need these things to survive. The conversation that we continue to have about character and aesthetics does not belie the problem. It's like Gary said, climate and nuclear war, and we're talking about aesthetics. We are doing this to ourselves, folks, and we can actually change it.
Susan.
Okay. Good afternoon. Hi, everyone. I am going to talk about affordable housing, also affectionately known when I was in the working world as Big A affordable housing. As one of my friends, actually maybe even more than one of my friends who have been subject to my rants and lengthy, passionate orations about housing policy over the years said to me recently, but everyone is paying attention to housing now. So doesn't that make you happy? Well, yes and no is my answer. Because although I've been living and breathing housing and land use policy during my 27 years as a planner at Sandbag and 6 years as a retired person who is still involved as a volunteer advocate and I welcome the attention to the subject near and dear to my heart, I am, however, greatly disappointed in the lack of attention being paid to Big A affordable housing. Big A affordable housing to me means that it is affordable to low-income households and rent restricted for a lengthy period of time. The issue that has persisted during the 30+ years that I've been involved is the continued need for and lack of progress in providing housing for our low-income residents and families. In preparation for today, I look back on several reports I was involved in preparing. They're all in front of me. Solving the Region's Housing Crisis, 2001. Homes for All San Diegans, the State of Housing Affordability in the Region, 2006. And Affordable Homes in Our Neighborhoods, 2008. Each of these reports declared that we were in a housing crisis, and each put forth recommendations that we either ignored or did very little about. It's not that we haven't accomplished anything. We did start paying more attention to transit-oriented development and smart growth. We completed 3 regional housing needs assessments, now 4, whose numbers allocated to each jurisdiction that drove grudgingly, in some cases, acceptance of more multifamily housing, especially in places with existing and planned transit. And we created some new state and local funding sources for affordable housing and smart growth, and lost some, most notably redevelopment affordable housing funds. Land was rezoned around transit stations and along transit lines, and specific plans were created and community plans updated for more housing. We also tweaked our density bonus program, and recently we have done away with single family housing. We have done away with single-family housing throughout the state. We now allow 2 to 3 accessory dwelling units in all single-family zones. And we allow single-family lots to be split to build 2 duplexes, 4 units. That's on the books now. Most distressing to me and many others, however, is that we aren't building enough of the housing for the many people in the region with low-paying jobs, of which there are many. Our past performance during the last housing element cycle in the city of San Diego demonstrates our poor performance in meeting our low-income needs. While 120% of our above moderate, basically market rate needs, were met, only about 20% of our lower income needs were met. This has consistently been the case in San Diego's housing history. Some react to stories in the media about the unaffordability of our city and region by saying, well, if you can't afford to live here, you should move or leave San Diego. But I ask, does this make any sense? Don't people doing these jobs upon which we depend, healthcare workers, teachers, childcare workers, janitors, restaurant workers, the list goes on, deserve a decent, safe place to live? I know I think so, and I think most all of us do. So the key question to me is, how can we provide more of the low-income housing we need? Most of the reports, policies, and programs that have been put forth, especially in recent years, have focused on simply building more housing or providing more capacity. We argue and discuss how and where housing should be built, the size of it, the number of bedrooms, and how much capacity we need to include in local plans, while we largely ignore how to provide housing for our lower income residents. And I think the results have been devastating, with growing homelessness and people living on the verge of being evicted or displaced, and people unable to find rental homes even when they have more than one full-time job. That's a problem. I'm here today to express the importance and belief that the city and the region can and should be doing more to address those whose needs are the greatest. In my opinion, our reliance on trickle-down housing is foolish and has not and will not work. The bottom line is we need stronger, not weaker, as have been recently proposed, requirements for affordable housing. We also need more funding for both state and at the state and local level to provide subsidies for this type of housing, and federal level too, I would also. Here's my list of what we need to do. Strengthen, increase citywide inclusionary housing requirements and those associated with complete communities and the ADU bonus program. I don't know if any of you know this, but in the North City area, up near the 56, the city of San Diego requires that 20% of the units be built as of work. And that has worked for the past 20 years. We should also consider a higher inclusionary requirement for projects in high resource areas, higher income areas. We need to create a local source of funding along the lines of what the San Diego Housing Federation is pursuing, and pair that source with inclusionary housing to remove the often made charge that inclusionary housing is a barrier to building housing. We need to increase the commercial linkage fees that are already in place, which provide a way for job creating industries to contribute to the housing needs of their lower paid employees. And finally, although I know there are others, we should analyze and adopt land value capture tools if shown to be financially feasible in places like University City, where the city is proposing 30,000 more units and 60,000 more jobs, and basically creating a windfall for the property owners. If we spend time, I have one more sentence. If we spend time and effort implementing some or all of these tools, we can make a serious dent in creating the balanced communities called for in the city's general plan and make progress towards affirmatively furthering fair housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Andrew.
Class. I'm serious because it's interesting to react to people's commentary, how these things are approached. I would generally say to this audience, first of all, we never really defined SB10 and what it is, and we don't want to debate the merits of it, but it's very simple. the idea is it was a way to subdivide a single family home lot and create, at least in the way that San Diego's planning department had proposed and implemented, up to one home per 1,000 square feet of lot area. So if you had a typical 5,000 square foot lot, you could put 5 homes. If you had a 10,000 square foot lot, you could put 10 homes. SB10 is different than the ADU law programs that everybody's heard about, in the sense that this provided an opportunity to build for sale housing. And that's an important part of the housing spectrum as we look at what housing we need in our city. We are building a generation of renters. I'm a multifamily developer. I build stacked flats. In the state of California, we've got a series of well-intentioned laws that have been misused. One of them is the construction defect litigation statute of limitations, which is now 10 years. Every building has some problem after 10 years, and there's a cottage industry. Well, it's not a cottage industry, it's a full-on industry. Lawyers right now, they'll go out and they'll wait, they'll see a building that's 9 years, 6 months old, and they'll say, I see a crack in the side there. How do we know that the whole building is gonna fail? You're afraid of being sued. I am definitely afraid of being sued. And many developers have literally gone out of business and with the subcontractors and contractors associated with that project. And so we don't build for sale housing in California anymore because we really aren't in a period of building single family homes anymore. It's harder to find single family homes. So we're effectively building a generation of renters. Okay, so SB10 was trying to address that problem. It's been stated before, the issue of SB10 and the problem that SB10 was trying to solve was addressing the housing crisis. The poor planning that was referred to in the title of this event is referring to inadequately building enough housing. Remember, it's always about the number of homes. If we don't have enough homes, with the simple principle of supply and demand, the price of those homes go up. The more that we build, the more we can meet the needs of the market, and the pricing of the homes will be more moderate. We haven't built enough homes, and as a result, we have moderate 2-bedroom, 1-bath homes in North Park that are selling for $1.4 million. And it's crazy. And that is a result of supply and demand. So the more interesting meta version of this conversation about SB10 is I've been working in housing policy for about 10 years in the state. And it's taken me kind of a while to figure out who the players are and who has control. And one of the things that's really important to understand is that local control of land use planning has removed the potential housing capacity from our city. Okay, so I'm going to say that a different way. The system by which we make land use decisions has not allowed planners to adequately do their jobs. It's not that planners didn't know we need the housing. Susan is a very smart person. She has written multiple reports on what the needs are. We know that we need it. So why haven't the planners been able to actually execute on their plans? Because we have a system where self-interested single family homeowners have controlled and been gatekeepers to that process. So what's happening? At the state level, the state has recognized, this isn't unique to San Diego, right? This isn't even unique to California. We're finding this is a problem nationwide. And actually, I'll go even further. It's a problem internationally. Actually, one of the most important housing policy reports you'll ever read came out of ULI Europe, right? They have the same issues there. So state legislators stepped in, and for many legislative sessions I've been watching, and there have been multiple bills that I've been like, that is exactly what we need. Let's build unlimited height within a 1/4 mile of transit. brilliant. We can build a ton of homes and it's right next to the transportation. You solve the housing and transportation issue in one fell swoop. Whoop, whoop, that died, right? That was about 5 years ago, SB10. So time and time again, I've watched these policies kind of come to the fore and just get shot down. So who's shooting them down? There are 3 powerful lobby groups in the state of California. They are the gatekeepers to this housing policy that we need. Powerful lobby groups are the California Association of Realtors, the League of Cities, and labor groups. Okay? So SB10 and its predecessor type bill, the ADU bills that were passed, were able to slip through the legislature and actually be implemented because each of those 3 groups either benefits or doesn't care. The California Association of Realtors loves ADU laws. Why? Well, if you add an accessory dwelling unit to the back of the lot, it increases the value of the home. The realtor that sells that home is now selling a more expensive home, and they benefit. And so their constituency benefits when an ADU is built on the lot. What does SB10 do? SB10 helps realtors because it's not rental housing. Now, we've got 10 lots to sell on a single family home lot as opposed to 1. Woohoo! Okay, check. See, the California Association of Realtors loves this. So that passed. The League of Cities. Why would the League of Cities pass this? The League of Cities has been opposed to so many bills because they don't like the state telling them how to plan their city. SB10 passed because they wrote in the city has to choose to adopt SB10. In California, San Diego's been the only city that's actually attempted to try to pass it. Not successfully yet. And so that's why the League of Cities let it through. So the last one, labor. Labor represents, people, the unions that the construction trades in particular want to make sure that they have a seat at the table. Typically, you're not going to find a single family home developer and or entrepreneurial general contractor using union labor. And so the unions aren't really interested in small scale projects. Unions benefit when there's an airport that's built, a bridge that's built, a roadway project. UCSD builds house and they're building 50,000 units at a time, right? That's when labor succeeds. So they said, we'll let this one slide. We don't care. So that's the kind of stuff that happens when the legislature tries to step in and supersede local control, is they have to navigate those 3 groups. So that's how we ended up with SB10. So I just want to make one final comment here. There's a lot of very, very important people on the stage that have far more experience than I do, that have, some are mentors, some are people I admire. But as a Gen Xer, I'm going to say that some of the people on this stage, just like those single family homeowners, are fearful of laws like complete communities and SB10 changing the fundamental understanding of how we do the planning. And that is, we need to have a vision and we need to control it. And if it's not per our vision, then we don't want to do it. I would suggest to you that in a crisis situation, we do not have the luxury to make a perfect new urbanist community or whatever planning sort of sphere you're particularly operating at this, at this moment. And so I would suggest that let's open the floodgates, let's allow progressive, let's deregulate land use policy. Let's see where the problems truly occur before we preemptively prevent them from occurring. Okay? This is the biggest problem, is that we are not allowing policies like, there was a lot of opposition to complete communities. Have neighborhoods been ruined? No. Are there problems with it? Yes. Can they be reformed? Yes. Well, let's at least figure out what the problems are before we say, we don't want to pass it because we're fearful it might create a problem. Well, you'll never get any housing built if everything, you're fearful that there might be some problem. Okay, that's my rant. But I do want to say one thing. Ricardo, I appreciate it, but I will never build colonial homes. You know, that's not something I do. Who's next?
Bill, Jeff, excuse me, Jeff.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, I'm curious, how many people here are actually not from San Diego? Right, so a lot of what we kind of talk about, and I think when you think about these kind of land use policies, you always hear, oh, Minneapolis is doing it, you know, Portland's doing it. You don't really realize what the rough edges are until it actually happens in a city and it gets implemented. A lot of those places, you know, get a lot of national press. You know, Minneapolis has a triplex, but we allow 12 units. We even have a 145 unit permit on a single family lot. So San Diego is actually the king of infill housing on single family zone lots across the entire country. We just, you know, don't get the same press as everybody else. So how do we look at this issue? You know, my organization is a grassroots organization. Typically, you know, people who are homeowners aren't organized in any way, and we kind of represent that in San Diego. And with in the same time, you know, our organization is very data driven. We have people that are involved in planning. We have people who are, you know, do AI and analytics. We have GIS programmers, so we can actually do, you know, extract information. And the reason that's important is, you know, first, I think you need to know what the context is so that you understand what the problem you're trying to solve. And then once you have that, then you can say, okay, what is the policy response to that identified need? Then, you know, I think using SB10 as an example, you can kind of say, did we have the right policy or did we not have the right policy? And it's not just in terms of creating overall capacity, but did we create a program that actually addresses some of the needs that we're talking about, particularly home ownership, like that. So, you know, as if you're not from California, you may not know what the regional needs housing allocation is, but that's the state's determination of how many units each city in California needs to build. San Diego has an allocation of 108,000. That overall number is, you know, we're behind that production, but frankly, as other people have alluded to, what's really daunting about that number is that 40% of the units that we need to be built for low, very low, and extremely low income households. A lot of times what happens is when you say, oh, we have a big gap, let's just build as much as we can at all price points, you know, kind of papers over the fact that it's never going to get to the lower incomes where you have that need, and you need to really have intentional strategies for dealing with that, as opposed to what San Diego does in a lot of cities, which is, you know, try and provide bonus incentives in order to get, you know, 4, 5, 10%, when in actuality you need that 40%. You know, I won't talk about it too much. Gary alluded to it. You know, it's not just that San Diego is leveling out in terms of population growth. The world is, right? And so, you know, in nationwide, the housing director, Marcia Fudge, said that we need, you know, 1.5 million new homes in the United States in order to serve the country's need for new housing. Well, in California, we have an estimate of 2.5 million. So unless we're going to suck 1 million people or 1 million homes worth of people from the rest of the country, we're not doing the calculation of our housing need exactly right. And a big part of it is there's certain other exogenous factors that affect the price of housing other than just pure supply. One of those is, again, that was talked about earlier, is just what we call urban containment. So we try and do something good, which is prevent sprawl development, because the more compact we are in terms of our development, the less vehicle miles traveled we have, and therefore, we reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But whenever you impose a boundary on land, now you made it a monopoly, and that monopoly can only appreciate in price because there's no competition from outward building that'll sort of bring that price and keep it in range. The other thing that's a success and a consequence is, particularly during COVID, San Diego was a place where somebody could move out of their Bay Area home, come down to San Diego, where it's relatively cheap, and compared to Bay Area prices, and that allowed people to bid up the price of our real estate. San Diego is a very unequal city economically. If you look at our sort of nominal dividing line is Highway 8. The northern part of the city is much richer than the bottom part of the city, and it has effects like when you want to deed housing affordable, well, the median income is high enough that in the southern eastern parts of San Diego, the deeded rate, the rent that you can charge somebody on a deed, affordability deed, is actually higher than what the market would bear in that place. And these are the kind of distortions that we get in our market. So a lot gets talked about single family zoning, and de facto, and it'll come to probably the rest of the country as well. San Diego, really, single family zoning is a type of multifamily housing at a low density. It's the right way to think of it. Every single family property in San Diego is eligible to be divided into 4 units. So that's if you look at the 200,000 homes that we have that are single family in San Diego, that means we have the capacity to add 600,000 homes just under current existing regulations, and that's, against a need of 100,000. You look at our commercially zoned areas, we have just on our zoning, 275,000 capacity. If you add in bonus programs, we can push that to 1 million. San Diego now has the capacity to build 19 times as many homes as our stated need is. And so why is that important? Well, it's important because it tells you 2 things. It tells you, first of all, if you're only building 5,000 homes a year and you have the capacity to build 1.9, maybe it's because you haven't, it's not purely a zoning problem. Maybe it's an actual, that's all the faster your development services can process permit. Maybe it's all the faster that your builders can actually build. And maybe part of it too is there's always that economic calculation that developers are making to say, am I going to pencil out this project and make money? So regardless of what the state says the need is, their economic models are actually going to drive what they build. So, I think that needs to be considered a lot. Going back to the capacity issue, really we need to say, what is it that we want from our different types of houses? And so we have, yes, a lot of single family neighborhoods in terms of zoning. Do we want all of our new housing pushed out into those neighborhoods? Because from a climate action standpoint, if you don't achieve a critical density of people in a given, per square mile, people don't take the bus. It's not a surface problem. It's a density of uses at the destination of transit. And that's why places like San Francisco work. That's why New York works spectacularly. San Diego is not like those cities. San Diego is like Phoenix, Dallas, and Houston. Nobody goes, I'm going to move to that city to have that that high-rise experience. Is, if we want to do that, we have to be very intentional about taking the people that we're going to be building houses for and putting them in places where we can create this kind of density, which adds a different type of living lifestyle, both to the people that live in those higher density areas and to their supporting neighborhoods. So I think that's important. The only other thing that I think I'll just touch on is, so what was the issue with SB10? So it was mentioned earlier, it was about how many units you put on the property, and that's not really the biggest issue that it had. What it had was no consideration of the scale of the property, of what was going to be built relative to the area that was going to be built in. So, and this is one of the few places where I can use the term floor area ratio and a FAR, and people understand what it is. Well, a typical neighborhood, and the whole concept of missing middle housing is, was developed by a person named Daniel Parolak. And the idea is that you're building multifamily housing of the scale of a large house. And what does that mean? Things like setbacks and heights and floor area ratio in particular all make sense within there, which is why we love bungalow courts. It's why we love quadplexes, because they are of this often indistinguishable from the single family home that they sit next to, and they have compatible architecture and other things. I know architecture is about standing out, but a lot of times infill housing is about blending in, and that's a unique challenge as well. SB10 didn't do that. So it said that you can build at a floor area ratio of 3.0. So relative to a typical home that's 0.5, that says you can build 6 times as much development, and it was scaled to the size of the lot. So think of this. If I have a 1 acre property, which you can get in San Diego because you can be on a canyon and you have open space, so you have that 1 acre. So a 3.0 says that I can build a 130,000 square foot structure, right next to that 1,500 square foot house that was built there at the beginning. It's that sort of mismatch of scale that just wasn't thought through on this. And one of the things that I wish the state would do is don't just say what's the minimum that's allowed by a regulation. They need to put maximum on these too, so that local planners can say, okay, this is something that people can have an expectation of when it's implemented, so that we it doesn't have this sort of high tension that goes with what San Diego tried to do. The final part of it that gets back to what did we expect? A lot of us would like to see a mode for building for sale housing. The problem with saying that I'm going to build a 20,000 square foot or 140,000 square, if I have the ability to cram all that together and build an apartment, I'm going to build an apartment. And so if you said, I want to encourage for sale housing, you needed to take something down to that smaller scale where that little amount of development would make sense for somebody. Today we have a small lot subdivision in San Diego. It's very rarely used. And the reason is because it's all in areas of super high density, and we constructed SB10 to do the same thing.
It's the privilege of being last. I had clean notes when I started, but jotted down things, various comments. To begin with, the question, we need housing. Yes, but to me, that's, so what? As Susan's been saying, we've been talking about that for 40, 50 years, and I imagine Mike even longer. And so, one of my, and I guess one of my issues sometimes is we try to dumb it down. And really, we should be more precise, more focused about really what are we talking about. Comparing median household income and median home prices. Okay, that's the median. That means half are more expensive and half are less expensive. I want to know what's the distribution of that half that's less expensive. And how does that compare to the distributions of the incomes? Gary has a very good point. We have a bit of a dumbbell economy here in San Diego with very high wage sectors, very low wage sectors. And we've lost a bunch of our middle wage sectors here in San Diego. And so that's part of the question and a problem. Are we talking about market consumers? Often we're talking about market rents. What's available on the market? How much is a home sell for? What's the rent if you're trying to find an affordable apartment? It's interesting when you look at the census and compare incomes to what the census reports people are paying for home prices. It's not as dire. And part of that is, I think, because we have many people who have either long-time renters or they're long-time homeowners and are paying low mortgages because they finance or maybe they pay off. And also they have a lower property tax basis, which is a peculiar thing here in California because of property. That provides a disincentive for that sector to put their homes on the market, which often used to be a significant source of the supply of housing that would be available to buyers of housing. And then, are we talking about new construction? Or are we talking about housing overall? I think we're doing sometimes a disservice when we focus too much on new construction to solve our affordable housing demands. How many here, I'd like to ask this, how many here in your first house, when you first left the home and parents, when you maybe had your lowest income of your careers, your adult lives, lived in a brand new home or apartment? 2 out of how many? Okay, I asked this at the APA conference in Fresno last week in a room of about 150 people. It was 1. In other words, existing buildings provide a valuable resource for our population and affordability. So for me, it's the question of more interested in where do we have areas of the market that are, in my mind, most concerning to me, and some of them have been mentioned here. I think Gary's correct on affordable family housing. That's a big problem. And we knew that was going to be coming a surge in demand because of the millennial generation. They're larger than the baby boom generation. And they're going to be a growing share cohort as baby boomers on. That's you. That's us. Yeah, right. And so they are in the family formation stage of life. It was interesting because 20 years ago, they were the force behind urban regeneration and rediscovering the city and urban neighborhoods. Well, now they're having kids and they need and are looking for affordable housing. And it's not just the flat and it's not just a single family home. There's the opportunity to provide affordable family housing with different home types, from row housing, triple deckers, walk-ups at scale. We have examples in the region, but not at scale, and we can learn a lot from other cities regarding that. Also, housing for the unhoused, or excuse me, the retirement housing. That's the other major concern because baby boomers and seniors, 15% of the population are seniors. That's going to be pretty soon 25% of the population will be seniors. And unfortunately, many of them are not prepared for retirement. And so the ability to pay for retirement and affordable housing is going to be acute. And I'm afraid will be a source of homelessness in the future with much of that population. And then housing for the unhoused, which isn't going to be solved by market forces. That is just a social housing commitment for us, for all of us. The other is where. Place matters. In fact, the price of home in a unit, not the unit, it's the neighborhood, it's the community, the unit where the unit is located, right? And so housing that's near jobs, housing near schools, housing near services, near parks, libraries, transit, near sidewalks that are walkable, in safe environments. And that's why planning is important as we consider how we plan not just the amount of units, amount of homes, but where they're located and with what kind of amenities create a neighborhood and our quality of life. We have plenty of capacity, and as city staff admitted in their presentation, in our current housing element, in our general plans, for about 20 years, maybe 30 years, depending on how much housing you think is demanded. We're still going to need homes after that period, right? The next 30 to 100. Hopefully we don't go the route of St. Louis, which was the second largest city in the country in 1990, or Detroit. Cities do sometimes decline. So we do have to think about how are we going to provide housing, and to me that's also part of our economic development strategy. If we have an Achilles heel to our economic development strategy as a region, it's our housing affordability for the workforce. So we do have to do that, but we do have some time to be thoughtful and deliberate about where we put the housing, how we provide the housing, what does it look like, is it in the right places, is there infrastructure and public facilities, not just physical infrastructure, but social infrastructure for the people living in the homes. Are they in areas demanded? Are they in areas that are safe? Is such a type of housing that's demanded? And so we can be deliberate, and we have a planning process for doing that, which is cumbersome. That's where we have our debates. That's where we have our CEQA. That's where we have our lawsuits. But once established, once adopted, I agree with many of the speakers here, homes then should be permitted through a ministerial process by right. But to do so before having that conversation with the community about all these different comprehensive issues to create a neighborhood, I think is jumping ahead of and why we get a political backlash when we try to do that. And I think that's slowing things down rather than accelerating our ability to find housing. So I'm not sure housing really is a entitlement capacity issue. It's more of a delivery issue. And the delivery relates to financing, it relates to the current economy, it relates to our ability to process permits in a timely manner, our ability to provide materials affordably, and labor. And so there are a lot of parameters in there. Entitlements to me are not the major issue at this point, maybe someday in the future. And then think about how we scale the housing and the different types of homes. And I think there can be a strategic way to create really lovely environments for our communities. In a lot of our plans, and in the general plan for a while, and many of the policies out there, density is envisioned along the corridor, the arterials, and transit-served districts. We have a lot of underutilized land on our arterials, on our corridors, a lot of strip retail, very underutilized. And I think that's where we can provide a lot of capacity before we need to go out to the backcountry and more land development with sprawling communities to create greenhouse gas emissions because of community business. Design matters. You all are architects. You know design matters. And design matters not just because of an aesthetic. Design matters economically. Because design creates value, and bad design can diminish value. And in economic terms, there's a term called externalities. And so that is something that's embedded in the value of what people pay for in terms of rent and home prices. And design is not just buildings, but it's also the streets, streetscapes, sidewalks, and public places within the community. I told Mike I'd mention this just because we used to talk about solar access upon San Diego. I haven't heard that conversation lately. It's important to San Diegans, access to the sun. These are issues that are common in Western cities and even some Eastern cities. There's a lot to learn and a lot of innovation happening around the country. Denver's doing a lot of this. Seattle, Bellevue, California cities. And so, let's learn from each other in addressing it. And I think we have some time. Just quickly on SB10, I don't think the law is about ownership. Maybe that was the staff's proposal. I also am watching the staff's presentation. They showed some very good images, what they intended in terms of design. I wasn't sure if the regulations were there to ensure that there would be that kind of design as they had presented. And so that is a question, I think, for you all as designers. How do we provide that kind of, not surety, but at least confidence to the community? I like to advise clients and cities that they propose a policy. Don't just show the great design that can come with that policy, but take that policy, have a drink, and then say, okay, now how can I take that policy and regulation and just make the worst and draw the worst design that you can draw that would still be consistent with that policy. And then maybe refine the policy before we finally adopt it. One of our major concerns is we don't want to have another era of the Huffman six packs that we had in the 60s and 70s that really did not pay attention to design very well, especially in terms of curb cuts. And for many of us in the room, it took us a generation to convince the public that density doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. There was a lot of reluctance because of the quality of the density that was provided in earlier decades. Good strategy and potential tool, SB10. I actually like that as a tool. I just think it needs to be applied based on context and more intentionally and strategically. Deliberately to consider infrastructure and public facility capacity, emergency access, locations within real walking distance to transit. Is transit being provided and served? The objective design frameworks, heritage in the city, which is part of the image of the city. I've lived in Beacon Hill for 2 years in Boston. That's still preserved, built from the 1800s. And then CIP priority and commitments. That it is tied to the city's commitment that they are going to make the infrastructure improvements to enable the infill development that is proposed in the vision. Feasibility, testing it, and then recognizing that it can be provided at different scales. SB10 is an enabling. Doesn't mean you have to build 10 units. You could build 5 units. You could build anywhere in between. And so what is appropriate in one part of the city may not be appropriate in another part. And have that public conversation and consideration before adopting a policy and an ordinance. This is why we plan together and to increase diverse housing supply while building neighborhoods. And so I hope that is a takeaway, and I hope that's what happens here in San Diego in the future.
You pass the mic back, please.
No.
Well, let me first say that planning is very important, and I plan to have this structured a little bit differently than your 3 minutes ran over. All worthwhile, because we have, I think everybody agrees to the need. Everybody agrees that we need to do something more than just build, I'm going to say, units. But it's how we go about it and how we think about it. I would argue that planning is important. I would argue that in Andrew's case, I want to speak to it. We have a record in this city. The faster we go, the longer it takes. Speed is our biggest enemy in city government. And so you've got to really think these things through to move things forward. We've gone through these stages. I go back, as some people pointed out, a long time. And I remember when the goal was to limit the amount of housing that was built in San Diego. The growth management wars of the early 70s, the growth wars and the population caps. I have over here my adjustable growth cap when we were arguing over how many units we would allow in San Diego. We put that on the ballot, 4 different numbers. So we really have to think these things through because we have a need. And I think that's what's recognized. I was going to say that after your 3-minute presentation, we get in a long conversation, but those 3 minutes are long gone. So I would like to see if there's any questions from the audience first, and then I'm going to ask you some more questions. But anybody? Jack? Jack was one of the people who put this together, so I'm going to wander over with the mic.
This question is for Gary. What is the percentage of the cost of the project in the front end development piece? The planning department, community development, all of those factors that the city, the building structure.
Well, clarification. You're talking about permit processing fees or impact fees?
The whole thing, what it costs to get to the point where you're going to the building department.
That varies by where you are in the city. One of the things about San Diego is it's a very large city. And what might be infeasible in La Jolla or Mission Bay might be perfectly feasible in Allied Gardens and college area. So
I can be more specific, $20,000 to $60,000 per, maybe even more than that. Actually, there's areas where it's $100,000.
Andrew?
Yeah.
Hit the mic so it can record.
yeah, well, let me just say, when I was playing director, the impact fees then were about $15,000 a unit for infill sites and $130,000 a unit for greenfield sites. And so the big charge in greenfield is they're having to build all the infrastructure and transportation is huge. The infill had a savings on infrastructure and transportation. Their big costs were was land and parks.
You want to supplement it?
Yeah,
So let me say that, with all due respect, it's probably the wrong question. The real reason that we have that housing is bid up is the price of land. It's land that matters. Just to put it in perspective, if you build a 3,000-foot home in La Jolla, it's at one price level. If you build that same 3,000-foot home in Oklahoma, it's at a substantially lower price level. This construction costs, the labor, the fees are pretty much at the same levels within a range. It's the land costs that change. The land costs are a function of scarcity. So to go back to the point that I made so many hours ago, the problem in our community is the imbalance of supply and demand, more demand than supply, which is perpetual. And since Mike and I were having this discussion back in our 20s, but he was 40. You know. The problem is that the scarcity bids up the price of housing. It's really pretty simple economics. And I just want to piggyback on Ricardo's point because I don't know if you know Ricardo, but I actually own just one block up a 2,000-foot home on a 1,000-foot lot. Yeah. So you're listening.
Yeah.
So you can do row homes. You can be very creative with single-family homes, high density communities, and just not rent communities. So you can do this. But again, I think that I sort of buy into a lot of what's been said today with respect to being really creative and using this new legislation as a way of catalyzing change and creativity. And by the way, one last thing. The problem with SB10 is none of what you have articulated. The problem is that these deals don't pencil out under SB10. As the city is interpreting, SB10 was just a purity law. It's the density. single family homes. The problem is that the city decided to put all kinds of extra goodies into the proposed regulation. This is what the planning department did, is they said, well, they could put an affordable housing percentage requirement. And I'm sorry, Susan, but anytime you put affordable housing percentage requirements, which have gotten bigger and bigger and bigger over the years, you create lack of feasibility in the housing projects. The housing projects simply don't get built. You can speak to that with respect to SB10, with respect to the state surplus acts, with respect to any requirement, city, county, or state that requires affordability. It's just not the way to go.
Any other questions from the audience?
So while we're on the subject of what it costs to develop a project. So I have a piece of property on the county. I'm trying to subdivide it into 4 lots. Even before I can subdivide it and get that approval, it's a $60,000 endeavor. Just for a piece of paper that tells me I can have 4 lots. That's the engineering, that's the CEQA, that's the environmental impact statement, that's all county fees. And so it's not gonna happen. So until some kind of reform comes for even at the city or county level, as far as fees goes, to subdivide. So you take SB10, I have 5,000 square foot lot, I wanna make 5 single family homes. That's 5 lots with what kinds of setback, with what kinds of restrictions? Am I gonna have to spend $50,000 to make 5 lots on my 5,000 square foot lot? It's really crazy. Then you've got a condo, you got a condo association because you're up, what do you do there? They got a whole nother set of parameters to deal with either common services, common water and fire and trash and all the rest of it. It's all separate services. I mean, I don't think it's well thought out. And I don't think that the financial structure has been addressed at both city and county level.
Anybody want to respond to that?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Are you gonna just?
Well, no, I was gonna make a response to, Mr. Anderson over here. Consensus has not built more housing. Trying to pull the community with us has not resulted in more housing. And so the idea that, maybe we need to talk about form or bulk or scale, what I think planners often forget, and actually I don't mean disrespect to planning profession, because I think there are a lot of planners that do try to comprehend some of this stuff, but economics drives the decision of whether or not these things work. And I was hesitant to say what Gary said earlier, which is it doesn't pencil, but for maybe a few cases, it doesn't pencil. SB10 is really, really hard to make work economically, but that's not a reason not to let it through. Because we're clawing and scratching at the edges to try to allow more housing to be built. And I think there's this fear that it's like, oh my gosh, there's going to be 1,000 Huffmans built if SB10 is passed. No, that's not true. First of all, there isn't a conspiracy amongst all homeowners, and they're all going to sell at once to SB10 builders, and all of a sudden the entire neighborhood is going to change. That's not the way cities change. These things happen one at a time, one lot here, one lot there, and guess what? There's time between to evaluate, well, that was a crappy project, we shouldn't do that again. So it's easier to, like I said before, allow these things, deregulate, and then come back and figure out, we're in a very weird situation. Land is so scarce and so expensive right now that there's less a fear of the Huffman instance happening than the fear of not building enough homes.
Well, I have to disagree with you. Of course, but tell that to the people in East San Diego. City Heights. Great working class neighborhood. Not necessarily against affordable housing. It was one project at a time, 20 years. And design matters. Design adds value. The consensus, I'm not in the fantasy world, it's absolute consensus. The planning is something that happens with people, not to people. And the conversation is important to get the issues raised and respected. those concerns and address them. And it's not a trade-off. It just means foresight. It needs some thinking about. And not relying just on the enlightened developer or the enlightened architect, hoping that's the one who is developing the project by law. It is, in terms of coming together, we have plenty of examples where we did that and created lots of housing opportunities as consequence. The whole multiple species conservation program for our region. When in the 1980s, we were having intense growth war debates. Every single project, a greenfield parcel was being sued because of habitat. The environmental groups and the building industry came together finally, partly through voter initiative, to create a system where we created habitat networks, identified what are we preserving, and then identified the areas where we will develop and build more housing and expedited the development of housing. So I think there are other examples, like, we could go on to downtown San Diego, we're sitting in one right now. So, that's why I think it's important that we do come together and have that conversation.
Since it's past 6 and we're supposed to end at 6, I'm gonna have the last word. I've been through this, we've gone through all these kinds of discussions. You need to continue because it is an issue. It's an issue that doesn't go away. But I think there are ways of looking at it, and a lot of it involves the dialogue and the conversation about the total picture rather than just building one unit or another unit. And I use quotes. Now I'll go back to 2. One, I was raised in the motion picture business, and I thought that it was unreal and planning was real, and I made a mistake. But my father used to tell me that making movies was this much, but dealing with people was this much. If you didn't do this, this would never happen. And unfortunately, he passed before I could agree with him. And he's right. And we need to have that dialogue. I use quotes sometimes, and I'm going to use one from this one. San Diego's housing problems are not going to be solved by using the same toolbox. Community needs strong leaders who will say enough is enough and will follow through to show the community what a good project really is. And that is from the San Diego Economic Development Corporation, from the Planning and Housing Director, 2002, which is me. So I want to thank you all for coming.